Welcome back to American Republic. We are now going to cover the last section, talking about the end of World War I. Opinion question I want to start off this class period with is, with the war now over, how would you handle the peace negotiations? If you had a say as a world leader, how would you deal with Germany's Central Powers after World War I? How should Germany, the other defeated countries, be treated? Would the victors claim conquered territories and possessions? And could peace be maintained in Europe? All of these questions had to be answered at the conclusion of this war. There's going to be different options, different solutions, different opinions given on this view. Let's find out which views will be taken now. Letter A. Woodrow Wilson. He had a plan. It was called his 14 points. His 14 points were the president's post-war plan that emphasized a just peace and a world in which war would be less likely. Of course, it consisted of 14 different points. They included neutrality on the seas, new countries for ethnic groups in Europe, and abolishing the practice of secret treaties and alliances. The only one that is worth noting is his 14th point, which included the creation of a League of Nations. League of Nations was an international organization designed to deal with problems peaceably, rather than fighting another war, because after all, this was the war to end all wars. The nations could discuss their problems. Wilson wanted a peace without victory, meaning no territorial losses for the losers, no reparations. Reparations, by the way, means payment for damages. Basically, Wilson did not want to punish the Central Powers at the end of this war. He said that weak nations should have the right of self-determination, that is, that they have the right to be independent. In other words, how did Wilson want to treat the defeated nations? Kindly? Meanly? Yeah, he wanted generally to be nice to the defeated countries. Should the victors claim territory? According to Wilson, no. Could peace be maintained, according to Wilson? He would say yes. Letter B, the Paris Peace Conference. Students, just to give you a heads up, this is the topic of your essay. If you want to go into more details, please refer to pages 409 and 410 in your textbooks. That'll help you to have more information for the upcoming essay. The Allied leaders met at the Palace of Versailles outside Paris in January of 1919. They were nicknamed the Big Four. It was the nickname of the four leaders who represented the victorious Allies from World War I. Of course, Woodrow Wilson was one of the Big Four. He represented the U.S. If you're looking at the picture, he's the man on your far right. When he arrived in Paris, he was welcomed by 2 million people who regarded him as a savior of Europe. Wilson believed that his presence at the conference would ensure the acceptance of his view of peace and the establishment of his 14 points. Georges Clemenceau, the man pictured next to Wilson, represented France. France had now been hurt twice by Germany during World War I and earlier during the Franco-Prussian War in the late 1870s. Clemenceau wanted to make sure that Germany was never strong enough to threaten France again. Another man, David Lloyd George, represented Britain. He's the man pictured on the far left. His goal was to ensure British superiority on the seas. And the fourth man, Vittorio Orlando, he represented Italy. He's pictured next to George with his hand raised, talking like typical Italian. Orlando wanted additional territories from the defeated countries. So based upon these three men's opinions, how did they want to treat defeated nations? Answer, poorly. Should they claim territory or reparations? According to them, yes. And could peace be maintained? According to them, only with a weak Germany. These are the big four. These are the men who will represent their countries during this conference. Can you think of any countries that aren't listed here that should be represented in the peace agreements? I can think of a couple. For example, Russia, and by the way, the losing countries, the Central Powers, were excluded from the peace negotiations. Remember, Russia had stopped fighting before the war was over. Russia, Germany, and the other Central Powers were not allowed to attend the conference. Because of this, the defeated countries would come to despise the treaties created. End result was the Treaty of Versailles. That was the name of the treaty that was signed between the Allies concerning Germany. There were other treaties made with the other defeated Central Powers, but concerning American history, this is the only one that really applies to us. Number one, all blame for the war was placed on Germany and its allies. Now, was the entire war Germany's fault? No, of course not. How could the assassination of an archduke from Austria by a Serbian terrorist be considered blame for Germany? You can't. But I guess with the fact that Germany is the one who escalated the war, all blame for the war will be placed on Germany. Number two, Germany lost its overseas empire and some of its own land. All of its colonies it once had in Africa and the South Pacific, gone. Even some of Germany's own territory, Germany itself, will be given to other countries after this war. Number three, Germany will be forced to pay huge reparations to Britain and France. Remember, a reparation is a payment for war losses or damages. Germany also had to allow foreign troops to remain in the country. And number four, the creation of the League of Nations. Wilson did not like the three previous points, but he managed to get his 14th point approved by the treaty. He believed that the new league would work out any problems that the Treaty of Versailles created. Letter C. American responses. While most Americans probably supported the treaty at the time, there were many in Congress who did not. So we might remember, Woodrow Wilson was a Democrat. Congress, especially the Senate, at this time was controlled by Republicans. In order for any treaty to be ratified, you needed the Senate's approval to get it passed. Republicans in the Senate, who had been ignored during this conference time, not given any input, not allowed to go to the Treaty of Versailles conference, they rejected the treaty, and Wilson refused to compromise. All treaties require approval from the Senate. Wilson had basked in his own glory in Europe, but had returned to reality with an unhappy Republican Senate. End result, the U.S. never ratified the treaty. They simply declared the war over, and they refused to join the League of Nations. It's ironic that the President of the United States came up with the League of Nations, but the U.S. itself never actually joined. Question I could ask, opinion question, should the U.S. have joined the League of Nations? Why or why not? Argument for joining would have been, well, maybe the U.S. would have had a greater influence in world affairs. Recognizing World War II is just around the corner, maybe the U.S. could have stopped it from ever starting. The reason why maybe the U.S. did the right thing in staying out of the war was, really, did the U.S. want to have to deal with other international issues? Some people see America as it doing better to deal with its own issues rather than other countries' issues. Whatever view you choose to take, the point of the matter is the U.S. never joined the League of Nations. Lastly, today, let's talk about the impact of war. Number one, optimism will be replaced by pessimism for the future. Before the war, Americans believed in the possibility for world peace and the advancement of mankind. But the war had been a horrible experience. Progressivism, pacifism, and the social gospel was now foolish and naive. Man was getting more brutal and more violent, not less. Number two, Christianity was also discredited in the eyes of many people. Europe was supposed to be a Christian continent, and yet the nations had led their men into a barbaric slaughter. European pastors had equated fighting for one's country as service to God, a view, by the way, which is called civil religion. After the war, many people discredited any religion as they stopped going to church, praying together, and morality will be rejected. And lastly, number three, they saw a rise in American Protestant fundamentalism. Conservative preachers saw the brutality of the German machine and blamed it on their godless philosophy, their godless psychology, their godless economy, their godless science, and even their godless theology. To fight this, Americans will fight liberalism and modernism in the churches, the seminaries, and in the schools. That, my students, is the end of the notes. Please reminder, of course, that you are expected to review, to prepare for the upcoming test, Chapter 20, and that next week you'll be receiving your Chapter 20 test to take. If you have any questions in preparation for that test, please email me or Skype me and let me know any questions you might have. Have a good day, be good, do good.